As always, we have Yanks on the call to help us do some of our set review stuff for this bonus video. We're actually going to be talking about what makes a good limited set, and we're going to talk about the best limited sets that we've had over the last few years. We're also going to discuss briefly what some of the different sets did right or wrong as far as mechanics, whether the cards were balanced, and what type of archetypes we really liked.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty nice time to do this because we're at a nice even 10 sets since they introduced player drafting in Arena, like non-bot drafting. So, you get a nice round number to look back on how those sets have been since we got to do, real kind of 8-player drafts on Arena.
Yeah, and I've been looking through the last 10 and man, some of these feel really long ago, but they really weren't. So let's go ahead and jump into the first thing that we wanted to talk about is each of us picked the top 3 things that in our mind makes for a good limited set. So let's go ahead and put those the lists of 3 up on the screen, and we'll discuss each one and what they mean to us and how they make for a good set. So Yanks, I put you first. We're going to go ahead and start with you. So first, and again, these aren't really in a particular order, but one of your top 3 is mana fixing. So what about mana fixing makes a good format for you?
So it's not just whether or not there is mana fixing or a decent amount of it, but it needs to be available in all 5 colors. Whether that can be a cycle of common dual lands or tri-lands like we see in the Streets of New Capenna, whether you have good artifact mana fixing, it just opens up the format to splashes. It lets people do sort of more variety of things, even if they aren't quite what the set was designed to do. You can splash that 3rd color. You can play sort of a weird color combination that isn't exactly on theme for a family in Streets or a school in Strixhaven, but you've got the mana to make it work because there's enough there.
Yeah, and this also not necessarily dual lands, but this can be achieved with cards like Evolving Wilds we get quite often. I was going to do all 3 of yours, but I'm going to jump into my number 1 because this kind of leads very nicely into it, which is multiple viable archetypes. So having a wide range of things be reasonably good, but also having the flexibility to dive into a particular wedge or color pair that's not natural, and fixing definitely helps do that. So in my mind, having those color fixing, which you think is very, very important, lends well to having a lot of different archetypes be viable and keeping the set fresher for longer. Would you agree?
I would. Now, one thing I will say is that, I say mana fixing is important, and it's just like, well, why don't they just put a ton in every set? Well, there is such a thing as too much mana fixing, because you do sometimes end up with everything kind of just piling into this amorphous pile of 4-color good stuff, which can get pretty boring if that's all you're seeing over and over again without any really defined archetypes.
Now, that said, I don't have mana fixing very high on my list only because I have had a lot of fun in just 2-color sets. I have never really had an issue with core sets that tend to be a little bit more simple. And I think that that's okay, but I definitely also like sets with a lot of mana fixing. I think it does make them a little bit more complex and give them a little bit more replayability. All right, so those are our first. Let's go ahead and move down to, this one is an interesting one for you to explain to us, blocking relevance. I definitely know what you're meaning here, but why don't you take it away?
Yeah, this doesn't necessarily mean I need a set to be heavily focused on creature combat. There are sets that have spells decks that are great. What I mean by this is there have been some formats in the past 5 or 6 years where blocking just feels impossible. They're just so dedicated towards attacking, whether that be there's a ton of cheap combat tricks. 2 examples I can really think of, some of them are a little older, but original Zendikar with Landfall, which was mostly a sorcery speed mechanic that only happened on your turn, boosted so many of your creatures so they were so much better on offense than defense that it was one of the fastest formats known. Triple Amonkhet was another one where red-white Exert was just the deck of the format because Exert only worked on attacking. So you would just attack and Exert, and then the other people would attack back and Exert. And you kind of played the format like 2 ships passing in the night without really interacting a whole lot. And I tend not to enjoy those formats.
Yeah, I do like when creatures are relevant. And in those formats, unlike some of the other ones that don't have a lot of relevant creatures, as far as there just isn't a lot of creatures and there's no combat, this is a different way for that to sort of manifest itself in that you're kind of playing solitaire, with the exception of being able to remove their stuff. And oftentimes we'll see this a lot too with a lot of flying creatures, where there's a lot of archetypes that do things like that. I know some of the Theros? What was the one that has like a lot of like the Extort, Azorius and Orzhov colors tend to have like a crap ton of flyers, and you just can't really interact with them unless you have a ton of removal. I find those to play very similar to what you're explaining.
Yeah, flying and evasion definitely fits this. I don't think those things should go away. They're keys to any limited format. You don't want everything to devolve into a pile of 2/5s and 1/4s staring across that aren't able to attack. But when everything is a 3/2 that gets first strike or gets something that just benefits it in combat when it attacks, you just get these blazing fast formats, and some people enjoy them. I don't particularly like my games to go on a little bit longer.
Yeah, I actually do too. I like grinding out a little bit more value. So let's go ahead and finish off your top 3 here. Hand smoothing. I'm guessing you mean things like the blood tokens we saw recently with Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt?
Yeah, blood tokens, cycling, Scry becoming an evergreen mechanic, I think was a great decision from Wizards when it first really saw it in original Theros and didn't come back for a little bit, and then they've just decided to put a little bit of it in every set. I think that's great. It just makes for better gameplay. It doesn't really affect so much like the draft portion or the archetypes, but it just makes you have fewer non-games. You're more likely to be able to keep 2 landers with a Scry or something like that.
I definitely agree. You could also keep more flooded hands, knowing that you have a couple of blood generators to help kind of mitigate some of the additional lands that you draw from there, which we all know is going to happen. So I think that's great. One of the things I think is a little tough to balance is, for example, with Crimson Vow, we had most of the blood tokens be just in 2 colors, which was really tough because it was one of the better things to get in the game, which made it hard for a lot of the other archetypes to stand toe to toe. So giving those options in ways that you can give them to all the colors or all of the different archetypes is tricky to balance, but I do think it's really important.
Yeah, definitely. You want every archetype to have access to at least some of this. Some are going to be better than others, especially when it's a signature mechanic of the set. Blood tokens, very thematic vampires. It makes sense that it's going to be a red-black thing, but you do want something like that all over the place, which Scry is now everywhere. Even though it initially kind of started as mostly like a blue-white mechanic, it now shows up everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to mine. We talked about multiple archetypes. One of the things I find tough with some formats, especially in things like Midnight Hunt, which we'll get to soon, is that there is only one archetype that's super playable. We had a little bit of problems with that in AFR where the sack deck was just the thing to be in, and if you weren't, you were just going to get beat by it all day. So having different things, I don't care if something is better, but I care that I can make a trophy deck in any archetype. Of course, maybe the average Broker's deck is going to be better than the average Maestro's deck, but I do want to be able to find that synergy and have playable archetypes in everything else. Cool build-arounds. I find that to be really fun. My second one was limited game-winning bombs. I probably should have said, limiting game-winning bombs. We want less Dream Trawlers. We want less Planeswalkers that are very, very impactful the turn that they come down. I want to be able to play more games of Magic, and I think the Dream Trawlers of the world just shut that down, which make for bad gameplay.
Yeah, every set is going to have some of these, and I think we're okay with that. It's the quantity and the rarity that they're at. At this point, with a mythic rarity, keep these things out of rare. As much as you can. If they're going to be really great at rare, then they need to be answerable.
Agreed.
Reasonably answerable, not like you have to have this board sweeper and it's also a rare to answer it.
Yeah.
So again, I think you need these bombs, right? This game is designed for Constructed as well. Those are the cards that go into Constructed, and that's fine. And you get beat by a mythic Planeswalker every once in a while. That's you get to beat people with them. Too, sometimes, but it's just what it seems to happen over and over and over again. And the cards 6 through 23 in your deck don't matter. It's only your top 3 or 4 that really matter, is when it gets frustrating. Yeah,
when you're playing against 2 or 3 Dream Trawlers out of your 7 or to 9 matches in your Premier Draft is just brutal. So let's go ahead and move to my last one, which is fun build-arounds. This is, again, something we'll touch on a little bit more as we go over the rest of the cards and our orders or our rankings. But having interesting rares that are not necessarily, or even uncommons that are not huge game-winning bombs that you can build a synergistic deck around. I know just this past week, actually the last video, if you guys want to check it out, was a Maestro's Ascendancy deck. This is not good even in most Maestro's deck, but if you have a build around, it's so much fun to play, and it can be really interesting, but a fair portion of the time when you play this card, it's just kind of a dud and ends up doing a lot more damage to your deck than normal. But like sometimes it works and sometimes it's beautiful, and getting to find those rare moments of joy is what I like to play limited, and it's what keeps me playing a format for longer than the first few weeks.
Yeah, I don't tend to build a ton of decks around these type of cards, but they are a ton of fun when they work out. Like especially if you see them right away as later in the format, like pack one, pick one, or pick two, and you're like, let's do this. You know, they don't always have to work. If they always worked, then it wouldn't be that fun. But, you know, it's when they do work that it's great.
Yep. I actually, in the Maestro's video from yesterday, I actually, at the start of it, like I got a Maestro's card and I was like, we just did this and it did not work, but we're going to do it anyway. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into the next portion of our video where we actually rated all of 10 of the last premiere sets in a score of 1 to 10 based on how much we enjoyed the format, how good we think it is. And make sure when you see these, try not to bite our head off because it is personal preference, but I do want to know what you guys think of some of these sets. What of these 10 were your favorite, least favorite, and where were we way off the mark? All right, so here are our ratings. A pretty simple, we did abbreviations. So top to bottom, top is the most recent, and then the bottom is the 10th furthest away, which is Ikoria. And we did a rating between 1 and 10. I think Yanks's was a little bit more varied, but we will touch on these as we go. To sort of accompany this, we actually picked out a card each from each set, which really sort of summed up our feelings for the set, whether that is good or bad. So let's go ahead and start with Streets of New Capenna. Yanks actually rated a 5, and I rated it a 7 out of 10. So Yanks, you picked the card Rabble Rousing. You want to tell us why you weren't a fan of Streets? You put it sort of in the middle there.
Yeah, I had a little bit of a tough time coming up with a card for this one because I have it dead in the middle. I don't hate the format, and I don't love the format. It's fine. I'm still playing it. I tend to enjoy it for the most part. I picked Rebel Rousing because it's kind of indicative of one of the things we just talked about. It's a limited bomb at rare that's really hard to interact with just because of its type as an enchantment, especially if you're playing best of one.
That's definitely true. There is some main deckable enchantment removal like the Iron Crowbar, but like it's tough. And if you are at all behind, even by just a little bit, this is going to end the game. This is an amazing rare that actually made our We Were Wrong list. So we gave this a bit of a bump in value as well. All right, so my card was the Spara's Adjudicators. This is a card that I actually really liked because of the mana fixing. I just kind of chose this one at random. Actually, that's not true. I think I chose this one because Brokers, I think, is the best archetype in the format. So I, just decided to give it its day in the sun. But I think that the fixing on these cards were amazing. I was in love with them. The moment I saw them during our set reviews, I was very high on all of them. And I'm very excited that they ended up being super playable. And for me, it has made Streets of New Capenna a little bit more varied. This is that, I believe, number 3, where there are a lot of different things that you can do. And part of the reason is because these splash and fix for themselves. So sometimes I will use these as a 2-color fixer. For example, if I am in the Obscura deck, I will use this as a white-blue dual fixer, and then I just use itself to cast itself whenever I no longer need that mana fixing. So it does sort of allow for a little bit more flexibility in the format.
Yeah, the fact that this cycle fixes for itself, I think we knew that when we did the set review. I just don't think, for me at least, that it really registered that I was actually going to want to do that.
Yeah, I think you thought they were also a little, like, you were really low on the rate for the actual creature size.
Yeah, and I think, kind of interestingly, these cards kind of indicate, when you see them played, they kind of mesh well with the strength of the deck. Like, Brokers is very good. This is one of the better ones of this cycle, I think. Obscura has been pretty good. And even though that's at 7 mana, that one in the cycle has been very good. But I just think, I kind of agree with you. These are a very well-designed set of cards. It's mana fixing and a threat all in one. And because of that, it's overpriced. And that's fine.
Yeah, I've loved every single one. I even like the Maestro's one, which I think is one of the weaker schools. I think that's a really good card still. So yeah, I gave this a 7, and this card cycle is part of the reason for that. Let's go ahead and talk about Neon Dynasty. This is a set we both rated at a 5. I was very underwhelmed for all of the hype and the wonderful art. I was pretty medium. Yanks, what about you?
Yeah, I've seen people talking about this as like one of their favorite limited sets ever, and it kind of shocks me.
Blows my
Um,
mind.
it wasn't awful. Like it was fun enough, but it didn't have a lot of staying power. The games felt kind of meh. It was just a functional, perfectly fine limited set. But when people start talking about it on the level of Dominaria and Triple Cons and original Innistrad, and I'm like, what are you doing?
I have no idea. Yeah, I saw one of the creators of the set, like one of R&D, was like, "Hey, I worked on this set and all of these others, including Dominaria. What was your favorite?" And this was like second place or something. Like half the people almost voted for this to be their number one set of the group, and I was like, "Holy smokes! This is just." It felt so medium. I didn't even finish my mastery pass. Like that's how, and I play Magic for a living every day, and I just like didn't want to play much. I don't know why. It just felt boring.
Yeah. And again, kind of like the last set, or Straight to Nuka I struggled a bit with the card for this because it just felt so medium. So I just wanted to highlight what I think is the best of the Shrine cycle. Just because it was a cool cycle of cards. It was a fun deck if you could get enough of them. They're uncommon, so it was hard to do sometimes. But if you could get a deck with three color deck with 3 of these, or just playing a couple of them together, it was a lot of fun. I kind of just like this cycle.
I actually really liked the Shrine cycle too. Not necessarily because I wanted Shrine stacking, but because I really liked the enchantment and the artifact, and sometimes both. Those were my favorite decks to play. Either the straight artifacts with like the red general, or the straight enchantments with the white one, or whatever. So these played very well with that, and I liked it.
And it worked really nicely that the white and black ones might have been the best too, and they fit in that white-black theme that wanted artifacts and enchantments.
So the card I picked for Neon Dynasty is Ao the Dawn Sky. This is an entire dragon cycle of scary mythics. Now, these aren't quite Dream Trawler range, but I found that because there was an entire cycle of them, I was coming across them quite often. And they're very easy to cast. You know, they didn't have like a split color combination, so you could just pick them up if they were in one of your colors and feel really good. There was no restrictions, no splashing needed. So they were coming out often, they were coming out easily, and sometimes as early as turn 4. Now these, again, they are not Dream Trawler strength, but they were still ending games at like an 80% rate, and I got sick of it very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a skewed perspective on the Dragon cycle, because my very first day, I guess, I don't know if it was my first match or my second match on my pre-release, playing Neon Dynasty. I played against somebody that had AO and the Green Dragon. Both games he cast it, both of them, and they never triggered because I exiled all 4 of them.
Wow, you just had great exile, yeah.
Yeah,
Sometimes
I was like, oh, this isn't that hard.
must be nice.
Yeah.
Not everybody has all the exiles.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't. Sometimes you do, and it's great. Or like a lockdown spell. I mean, I've definitely had them, but it's just an answer. It's something I was coming across so much and always had to have an answer, and I just didn't.
Oh yeah, I mean, this one in particular could be game breaking. In that same event, I had AO as well, and I played a game where we were just kind of in a stall where I kept attacking with it, and he had these bunch of these 1/1 flyers to chump, stay alive, and he finally like 3-for-1'd himself to trade for it. And in the same turn, I used the channel ability on the black legendary land to get it back and recast it after having put like 14 counters on things.
So in every set, they have the black spell that lets you get +2 and flicker it basically after it dies. It comes back into play. This was the first time in many sets that I've ran that, and I ran it on AO in one of my first sealeds and just like kept flickering him multiple times. It was insane. So let's go ahead and move on to Crimson Vow. This was the second of our Innistrad sets. Yanks, you picked the Avabrook. Why did you pick this card as your Vow card that you actually gave a 7 to?
Yeah, this is a little funny because I actually liked Crimson Vow as a format, but I absolutely despise this card. Like, this card should not exist. I don't know who this card was printed for. It ruins limited games, and it's not really good enough for constructed. I am automatically prejudiced against anything with the word hexproof on it because I think it's an awful mechanic, and I'm really glad they've started doing things with ward because I think that's a much better version. But yeah, I just on the whole, I actually like Crimson Vow. I like blood tokens. I thought it was a decent format, but this card just irritated me. Although at least it's at Mythic where it should be.
Yes, Mythic, and that's why when people were so upset about it, it didn't bother me. This is getting close to that Dream Trawler territory, but I think I only saw it 3 times throughout the entire set played against me. Now, maybe it was in their deck more, but 6 is a lot harder to get to, and again, it's Mythic, not rare, so I didn't mind it quite as much. I think the answer to your question is who is this made for is the EDH crowd. It's just the big werewolf for the werewolf EDH crew, which I know exists.
Yeah, they have commander sets for that.
Yeah, I agree, but whatever, exciting werewolf to sell the werewolf sets.
Yeah. So in the vampire set.
Yeah, fair. I actually liked Crimson Vow a little bit more than Neon Dynasty. I gave it a 6, and the card I wanted to highlight here was Gluttonous Guest. This is a very simple common, but a great build around. It had a lot of triggers with things like the Blood Sayer Vampire, which is like every time you gain a life, you get a clue, and you could, or not a clue, a blood, you could do that over and over again. So it felt very synergistic, and there was a bit of a life gain sub-theme in the set. So I had a lot of fun with Bloods and getting to explore those and having simple commons like this that don't necessarily seem powerful be very important and key to my builds.
Yeah, I really like Blood tokens, particularly because it forces you to make a decision, like with them. With your mana, with the cards in hand, it's not looting where you get to see both options first. You have to discard first. Anything that brings a little more of decision making into the game, I tend to enjoy. And I kind of just like 1/4s because they slow the game down and give you more time to let that pseudo card advantage you're getting have an impact.
All right. Jumping over to Midnight Hunt, our first of the Innistrad, we have Organ Hoarder for Yanks. This is a set we both gave a 2 to. This was my least favorite, your second to least favorite set in the last 10. Tell me why.
There was only one deck in this format. It was blue-black. Anytime you just saw Organ Hoarder get played across the table or some other blue-black cards, you just like rolled your eyes like, okay, again, really? Like, the card doesn't even read to be that powerful, but just in the context of the set, it just was.
Yep.
And that deck was just so far and away the best that it just wasn't even worth trying to play other things.
It's funny, in the set of 10, there's actually 2 other sets where I think I have this exact same complaint. And I think this, even though I have the same complaint, this one felt the most oppressive to me of the bunch. And I think that's why it's rated my lowest of the 10. Because as you'll see from my choice, the Diregraph Horde, this was just pack one, pick one. The Organ Hoarder or this, it was better than 90% of the rares. If you're not in this archetype, what are you doing? And it didn't really feel like I could, like I did in my top 3 for the beginning of the video, it didn't feel like I could get a trophy deck, even if I had a solid deck. It felt like blue-black trash commons was just better than anything else.
Look, I mean, neither one of us is saying that there shouldn't be a best deck in the format. There's always going to be a best deck in the format. The problem is draft is supposed to be self-correcting. When there's a best deck in the format, an 8-player draft, people are going to naturally gravitate towards that, which thins out the options and makes whoever's drafting the undrafted colors better. And that's the way it's supposed to work. But when the deck is just so much better, and it's all common so it can support 3 or 4 drafters at the table, it's just not any fun.
Yeah, I think we're, for what our current set is, the Streets of New Capenna, everybody's saying Brokers is far and away the best. And I personally agree, but I rated it a 7, not a 2. That's how much of a difference there is. And I think the key is, can you produce a deck winning, a trophy deck in a different archetype? And if the answer is yes, even if it's a struggle, even if the average Brokers is better than the average Maestros, can it work? And in this set, the answer was no.
Yeah, the current set, I think everybody agrees Brokers is the best, and there's multiple pros I just saw yesterday on Twitter talking about how pretty much their entire format has just been drafting all the black-red cards because nobody wants them, and just running to great decks with some Maestros or Riveteer stuff that's really just black-red splashing.
All right, so let's get to another one of the sets where we both actually agree. You gave it a 4, and I gave it a 7. That's maybe a little, we'll get to that. But this was another one of those sets where there was really one deck that was ruling them all for many, many weeks. So why did you pick the Ghoul as your card for your 4-rated AFR set?
I don't think you can talk about AFR without talking about the deck you just mentioned, which is the Black-Red Sacrifice deck, Sepulcher, Ghoul, and Price of Loyalty, which just kind of ran the format. And I put this set, I mean, this is the set we have the biggest gap on in terms of rating. I have some other reasons for it, but one of them is this. The deck I thought was too good, and I particularly dislike Sacrifice decks, as I just don't think it's a fun style of gameplay to play against. So it's frustrating to me when that's the best deck in the format. And this, for the first time, admittedly in a long time, was far and away the best deck in the format.
Agreed. Yeah, I also think that I think that the Midnight Hunt was more oppressive as far as being the best deck, not close. But this was definitely dominating massively, far more than what we have now with Streets of New Capenna or any other format. This was probably, of the bunch, I think of my 3 that I mentioned, this is probably the least oppressive of the bunch, but still very, very bad. The thing I liked about the format and why though I know that was very oppressive, is because I did feel like I could get game-winning decks in Selesnya and in Adventures and blue-red treasures. I was able to blue-red die roll. I was able to get 7-win decks, and I had a ton of fun exploring the different things. Now, I will say that maybe there's like an extra point bonus because I really did like the flavor. All of the cards that was like, you meet in a tavern, and it's like a picture. I'm a hardcore D&D player since I was very small, and I loved it. But the other thing is I really liked the die roll mechanic. I don't like randomness in my games. So this sounds weird that I like the die roll, but I feel like the die rolls didn't impact the games in a way that was game breaking. It was like, you get the card, do you get the slight bonus? Do you get the little treasure, the little extra thing? And I felt like that was a really nice way to incorporate the D&D stuff and kind of still make it exciting without being like, oh, they rolled a 19. Okay, I guess you win the game.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other reasons why I have this rated so much lower is I just hate the die rolling mechanic. I will agree with you. I think it was less of a problem than I thought it was going to be when it was first announced. Because you're right, most of the things were pass or pass plus, not pass fail.
Yeah.
Which makes the randomness less of a problem. But I said, there's enough variance in Magic already. I don't need more. In a whole class of cards. You want to stick it on a card that probably is just there for a commander or something, fine. But having a significant number of them, I don't like. And like you said, you really enjoyed the flavor. I'm not a D&D person.
Yeah.
Some of those card names and all the 400 different ability words really annoyed me.
That said, I would not like the die roll to be a evergreen thing. I liked it in the D&D set. I want to explore the D&D world. But like, if this was a thing that I had to deal with all the time, I would agree. I would not like die rolling. Yeah,
and if you're going to do it, this is where you do it. Yeah. It makes sense.
All right, let's go ahead and move on. This was actually one of the ones this is both of our number 1 in the last 10 sets. We both rated this a 9, Strixhaven. Yanks, tell us why you picked Environmental Sciences as your card and why it helped give it a 9.
So looking back at the 3 things I mentioned, obviously this has nothing to do with blocking, but this is mana fixing, and the entire concept of the learn lesson mechanic is kind of a bit of hand smoothing. It lets you somewhat pre-sideboard for what you need, because you've got, as long as you've drafted them, these in your sideboard, you can go grab whatever you need when you get your lesson. I really like the fact that this is such an innocuous card. 2 mana, get a land, gain 2 life. That's okay. I mean, we see things like that all the time, but it ended up being a really critical card in this format. Like, everybody wanted it.
Every deck, this was top 3 pickable easily. I mean, this was better than, some of the medium removal. This was a very impactful card in the format, and it led very well to allowing you to do different things that were not necessarily designed for the format. So that leads kind of nicely into my card, which is the Quintorius. So in my top 3 things that make for a good limited set, I talked about variation in decks. And I think Quintorius is a really good example of that, because Not every Boros wanted a Quintorius, but there was a Boros deck that did. And the fact that there were so many different schools and so many different sub-themes within those schools, there was a lot to explore.
Yeah, one thing I thought was really interesting in Strixhaven is Boros, just looking at this card, there's a few things you never see with Boros. First of all, when do you see a 5-mana 2/4 in Boros? Boros is the aggressive color pair. And second, it cares about your graveyard, something that red-white never cares about. Like,
Yeah.
the fact that they, within the theme of the set, managed to turn a color pair to doing something completely different than what it wants to do, and yet you could still draft a Boros aggressive deck.
Yeah,
But it had this alternate theme as well.
some of the schools broke the mold for their normal, like, scripted goals in a match, which was really nice. And Boros was one of those. And again, those sub themes, so not only do we have 5 schools, we also had these weird sub themes in each school that could even be broken into separate color pairings. And with cards like environmental sciences, you could easily splash those colors and explore combinations of schools endlessly. And so this was my number 1 set in the last 10 sets, not close.
Yeah, agreed. I love the learn lesson mechanic. I probably, as you may have guessed from talking about my thing liking blocking relevance, this is also probably the slowest set in the last 10, like the longest games, most grindy, which leads to the kind of play I like to see as well. So
the learn lesson also really helps create more games of Magic with cards like environmental sciences. It lets you fix your mana, lets you do some stuff without being necessarily overpowered, except for Mascot Exhibition. We won't talk about that. That card's very strong. But yeah, a lot of the lessons just kind of help smooth and do some stuff and lets you get a lot more card advantage and value. But the other cool thing is that it was accessible to everybody. Most of the, all the colors had learn spells and all the lessons were colorless. So it felt pretty strong. Not all, but most.
Yeah, and it was a great mechanic for best of one because you could put things like the red spell that destroyed an artifact or dealt 1 damage in your sideboard, and you have access to it in best of one, which you normally don't get that effect.
Yeah, that was it made drafting more unique because you could draft for your sideboard and pick cards up like that, where you just don't need to do that in best of one. So I felt like I was exercising a piece of my brain I haven't used on Arena in a long time. All right, that's a good place to stop for that. We can rave about Strixhaven for days, I'm sure. So let's go ahead and talk about Kaldheim. This was an okay set. We both gave it, again, the same rating as a 7. This actually feels, maybe I might have given this a little higher than I feel, but like, I don't know. It was a long time ago. I kind of forget. Tell us why you picked Gates as your 7 representative card.
Gates is really there as a representative of the entire cycle of these lands with the tap lands. Produce 1 color, and then you can sacrifice them for the effect. I just like this sort of card design. It's not mana fixing, right? It's actually just a worse planes in terms of what it does for mana. And it's not snow, which in a snow set. But you get to put basically an extra spell into your deck. Instead of playing, your 23 cards, 17 lands, you're still doing that, but now you've got a 24th spell and basically a divination that you can get off of this card. I think just, none of them were completely overpowered. Some of them were better than others. I think this is one of the better ones. But I just like this design, and I think this sort of thing leads to better games.
Yeah, I definitely liked the cycle. I like the land cycles we have now in Streets of New Capenna, where it's like you can draw cards later, and drafting in that way with that mindset really is a bonus skill, I think, that you need and makes for more interesting gameplay. I chose the Infernal Pet, one of the cutest cards printed in the last few years. Look at his little snoot. I picked this card as a representative of all of the different types of unique build arounds that we don't typically see in a lot of sets, that are just so obvious. And there was more of them than normal, and not every color pair had to have this. So for example, you had like green-black elves, you didn't need to do this. You also had black-white angels and life gain, you didn't need to do this. But like, you could do this, and it was really fun, and I liked my little Infernal Pet.
Yeah, I think Kaldheim was good. I think the reason I have it a little bit below Strixhaven is it started out really good, and I think the format devolved a little bit near the end into a bit of a Teamer Snow mess. Teamer/4 color Snow just kind of became the best deck, and you could just put anything you wanted into the deck. But it didn't start off that way. It took time to get there.
I have it a little lower just because I don't feel like it had enough staying power. Even if I didn't necessarily feel like it turned into a mess because I was drafting a variety of decks all the way to the end, but like I just didn't feel like my heart was in it for quite as long as Strixhaven. All right, Zendikar. This is the return to Zendikar format. You gave it a 4. I gave it a 6. And again, I will admit this is starting to get where, like, I don't know, my memory's a little fuzzy. I don't remember liking Zendikar, but I also don't remember disliking it that much. I had a blast with like the cleric, Orzhov clerics, but tell us why you gave it a 4, Yanks.
Yeah, again, we're getting back to the point where I'm a little fuzzy too. I remember just not particularly loving the set, but I couldn't remember anything particularly egregious that I would hate it. It just kind of felt underwhelming. I mean, I think that's 3 Zendikar sets in a row that have felt that way to me, including Battle for Zendikar and Oath of the Gatewatch. It just, I don't know. I just didn't love the themes. It just seemed very kind of meh. Now, there were a couple things I liked about the set. This Relic Amulet I thought was a fun build around. This Wizards / instant sorcery deck was kind of fun, and I particularly like this card because it led to some interesting gameplay decisions on sequencing, on when you cast your spells. Do you need to activate it first so then you can restart the counters? Because it's not like you got to pick how many you removed; you lost all of them.
Yeah.
Or do you play it first? It ended up being a lot of kind of interesting decisions throughout the course of the game that I like with this card.
Yeah, I liked that. My favorite card was Rune Crab. That's not the card I picked, but I wanted to put it in just so that way everybody could marvel at its beauty. But the card I picked was the Bane Veil. This is just kind of a representative of all of the modal spell lands. This made for some amazing gameplay in that you could prevent yourself from flooding out late in the game. You could get extra cards when you need them. You get extra lands when you need them. And it was also a really cool card that you could kind of use as a bonus with the landfall stuff. There were a fair amount of cards that would allow you to pick up your lands so you could re-trigger landfall. And this was a great way to kind of abuse that. And also I think that with the exception of Learn Lesson, this is also in the running for top design of a new card in the last 10 sets.
Yeah, these spell modal lands are great. It lets you either play fewer basic lands, because you can play these in your deck, or if you're more concerned about getting mana screwed, you can just play the same number of lands and just add these on top of it because they're also spells. What I like about this one in particular is that this is an effect that you would probably not put in your deck.
No.
Except for the fact that it's also a land. Like, that's the kind of like good design I like on these. If you're playing, there's the black rare one, I think it's Hagra Mauling. It's a kill spell. You're almost never playing that as a land. It's not really that interesting of a design. But this actually gives you an added effect that you would probably not put in your deck without the fact that it was on a land.
Yeah, it's definitely two ways, right? It's like, okay, I would play this if it wasn't a land, and then you can not get land screwed and do the thing, right? Which is nice. But then, it's better than a land late because you're not flooding. And then you get to use more unique cards that you wouldn't normally get to do in limited because they just take the place of like, a 10th land that you did not need to draw. All right, moving on to M20. We weren't sure if we could include this because the M sets, are kind of whatever. Yanks, you picked a 6 for this. We've actually both picked 6. Teferi's Tutelage is one of my favorite cards. I'm a big Mill fan. Tell us why this is a 6 for you.
So this set was, again, the core sets historically and the original M14s, 15s, stuff like that, they've never really stood out a ton for me. And they've always kind of been designed that way to be more basic. They usually don't have a cycle of name mechanics that you can remember. But this set seemed pretty good. Like, it had some good themes. You had the cats and dogs in this set. But I just kind of remember this card being fun, build around this sort of mill deck. Teferi's Tutelage was a fun card. I'm usually not a huge mill player, but this deck, I played this deck a few times, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love killing people with mill. I don't care. I'm a villain. That's fine. Tutelage is great. One of the things I really liked about the M21 set is that we had a lot of good playable cards, reprints, like the Scavenging Ooze that was reprinted. And we had good commons and uncommons like Thrashing Brontodon that were fantastic and limited and very relevant and constructed. This was a sideboard card in Standard for quite a while. And I think it was just a good design card. This is never a thing that I thought, oh, they have a Thrashing Brontodon, I can't win. But it was a good piece to stop some of those things like Ember Cleaves and such. And yeah, I think this is a well-designed card, and overall, I thought M21 was reasonably balanced. Maybe not quite as exciting as I would like, but very balanced and had some good cards.
Yeah, Thrashing Brontodon's card you saw constructed for a while. Anytime you can get this sort of disenchant effect on a card you're playing anyway, it's good design, especially as we move into a time where we're designing a lot for best of one. Just being able to actually have an answer for some of these rare artifacts or enchantments that can run away with the game and not have to play disenchant in your deck.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to the last set of the last 10, and that's Ikoria. This is Yanks' least favorite and my second to least favorite set in the last 10. So Yanks, tell us why.
Yeah, this is probably my least favorite limited format since I came back to playing in original Theros. So in the last 10 years, the card you're looking at is Y and the entire cycling deck. The format just stopped being fun very, very fast. The deck was too good. It was too easy to get. And because of the way Arena works with the hand smoothing mechanic, meant you're playing, and it's the cycling one, you're playing like 9 to 12 land decks sometimes with this. So it was just so easy to just beat people down. The gameplay against this deck was not any fun. Like, you just try to like outrace it before they get their Zenith Flare, and then they hit you for 14 and the game's over. Like,
yeah, and once they hit you with it, they buy themselves so much more time to find the second one. Yeah, when we were actually setting up the slideshow, Yanks was like, I already know, like, I want to take a cycling card. Which cycling card do I want to use? I was like, is there a question? Like, it's obviously Zenith Flare. Yeah, this was an oppressive card to play, an oppressive deck to play against. It was particularly annoying to me because I struggled to draft a good one. So this was never a set I really figured out. It isn't my least favorite set because even though this is the second most oppressive format in the last 10, I actually really did like the mutate mechanic. I thought it was pretty interesting. It kept things fresh. I was also able to get a trophy deck in many different archetypes throughout the entire set. So I didn't quite hate it as much, and I had a lot of flexibility with cards like this because the mutate cost is only hybrid lands, so I could put this into a lot of different sets, so you would get this ability mixed in with different color pairings. You know, you could use it if you were white-green, you could use it if you were black-blue, you could kind of mix it up. So it felt like you were getting a different variation of the deck and having cards like this synergize in different ways, and that kind of kept it fresh for me for the length of the duration of the events.
Yeah, I think Ikoria had slightly more variation in it than Midnight Hunt. I think what differentiated to me is there is like nothing that was more mind-numbing and dumb than playing an Ikoria cycling mirror.
Yeah.
Like, you guys like, what are we doing here? It's like playing a storm mirror. Like, what's the point? Like, Midnight Hunt, even though you were playing a ton of blue-black mirrors or playing against blue-black, at least the gameplay to me was interesting. It got repetitive, but at least the gameplay was interesting. There was never anything interesting about playing against cycling.
Well,
even with it.
The thing for me was that the cycling deck was not as... It was busted, but I felt like I beat the cycling deck a fair amount of times because there were so many people drafting it, right? And there's only one real big payoff card, and it's an uncommon. Sometimes their deck just got one of them. And so, like, there was a lot of, like, medium minus cycling decks floating around, whereas, like, we saw every single big payoff card for the blue, black, and Midnight Hunt was just a common. So they had like the Diregraph Horde, the Organ Grinders, the Zombie Falcon. It was just oppressive common after common after common. Whereas this deck was like a little bit more fragile. They had to have their shit together a bit more. So I didn't find it as bad. And I've also found that the other decks could just get there sometimes.
Yeah, the cycling deck definitely had a bigger fail rate. I think the best cycling deck, though, was way better than the best blue-black Midnight Hunt deck.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But you didn't see them that often, so that's fine.
Yeah.
So that is the end of our top 10, or I guess it's not even a top 10, it's just the end of our like what makes a good limited format and like our thoughts on the last few. And the reason we wanted to do this is because I get asked in stream a lot, like, what do you think of this set? How is this set better? What's your favorite set in the last 10 years? What's your favorite limited set period? So it just kind of seemed like a really good video to make. Yanks, thank you so much for joining us for this.
Yeah, so I have one question for you.
Please.
If you have Strixhaven as a 9, what's a 10? What's your 10 limited format?
Khans of Tarkir and Dominaria.
Stole my answers. Those are my 2 as well.
Those are good limited sets, and I think across the board, limited players would agree.
Yeah, I think the other one, and I didn't play then, and I don't believe you were playing a ton at that point, was Original Innistrad. People talk about that.
Oh, I did play Original Innistrad.
Did you play Original Innistrad?
I sure did.
That was during a gap when I wasn't playing. So a lot of people talk about that as being the best limited format ever. For me, it's Triple Khans.
Yeah, Triple Khans was good. Before I came back the core set before Innistrad, the original.
Okay.
The last thing I wanted to mention, guys, this is not Magic related, but it is the start of Pride Month. So down below in the comment section, or down below in the info section, I'm going to be putting a link to the Trevor Project. This is a charity page that I am running for my entire DGen team and myself. We're going to be running a couple of charity events and also like a tournament structure, which is really cool. I'll have more information on moving forward. And if you guys donate through there will be some giveaways and stuff to the community, as well as helping me compete in a wildcard tournament for prizes for you guys. So make sure you guys check out that Trevor link if you are interested in giving to a really good cause. The Trevor Project does give to LGBTQ plus community. They do a ton of work and it really helps LGBTQ plus youth. So please consider to donate. We'll be doing this all month long, as well as giving away some really cool stuff. So Yanks, thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.